My brother sold my business idea while I worked 12-hour days, so I rebuilt everything from scratch and left him with nothing at all. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I've been grinding day and night to make my dreams real. Most mornings I wake up before the sun, brew a terrible cup of coffee, and dive straight into my laptop, surrounded by stacks of notebooks and scribbled ideas. My small apartment smells faintly of old takeout and ink, and every surface is covered in sketches, spreadsheets, and sticky notes filled with half-formed plans. Friends haven't seen much of me lately, and honestly, I don't mind. Social life feels like a luxury I can't afford when I've got something important to build. I'm not just working a 9 to 5. I'm juggling multiple side projects, late-night coding, research, and meetings with potential collaborators. Every day ends with my body aching and my mind buzzing. But there's a strange thrill in that exhaustion. A feeling that I'm inching closer to something real. The idea I'm pouring myself into isn't flashy, but I know its potential. It's a tech solution I've been refining for months, something I've tested, prototyped, and kept private from everyone except a trusted few. Every line of code, every market analysis, every sleepless night feels like it's stacking toward a breakthrough that could finally change my life. I've sacrificed weekends, birthdays, and even a few relationships just to keep moving forward. The vision is clear in my head, a product that's useful, scalable, and something people genuinely need. I've convinced myself that my dedication alone will see it through. Then there's my brother, Ryan. Ryan's the kind of guy who can walk into a room and instantly light it up. Charming, likable, the guy everyone thinks has his life together. He's always popping in with helpful suggestions or volunteering to handle small tasks, like coordinating a meeting or sending an email. At first, I appreciated the support. It felt good to have a family member in my corner, someone who seemed genuinely proud of my hard work. But every so often, he drops a line that gnaws at the back of my mind. "This idea could really blow up if you let me pitch it," he said casually one evening as we went over some investor notes. I laughed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just trying to help. Yet, a tiny knot of unease formed in my stomach. Something about his tone didn't sit right. But at the time, I was too focused on the late nights, the coding, and the endless planning to care. I convinced myself everything would be fine. Or at least, that's what I told myself as I poured another cup of bitter coffee and got back to work. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of my laptop. And as I stared at my notes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something big, though I had no idea how close I was to falling. Ryan started showing up more often, always with a grin and some great idea he claimed would help my project. At first, it was small things. "Hey, I can handle this email for you," or "let me call this contact." "You've got enough on your plate." I told myself it was fine, even helpful. Having him around felt like validation, like maybe I wasn't alone in this grind. I even found a strange sense of relief in his charm, the way he could smooth over investor nerves or make small talk that I'd never mastered. For a while, it felt like he was part of the dream, not a threat. But little by little, things started to feel off. I'd noticed messages being sent in my name, documents slightly altered, minor decisions made without asking me. Nothing catastrophic at first, just enough to make me pause. "I just thought it would save time," he'd say, leaning back in my small couch with that infuriating smile. "You've got so much on your plate." And I'd believe him, rationalizing that I was too stressed, too sleep-deprived to see the real picture. Maybe I was imagining things. Then there were the subtle digs that started to sneak in. "You're so slow with this," he'd comment during a call. I just had to push it forward. It wasn't aggressive, just casual, delivered like advice, but my stomach would twist. I began noticing how he'd casually mention potential investors or opportunities and conversation as if he was testing the waters, feeling out my network without me realizing. Every time I brought it up, he'd flash that grin and shrug. I'm just helping you, bro. And for a while, I wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him. By the third week, I found myself double-checking emails, rereading contracts, and staying up later to ensure nothing was being handled behind my back. The late-night hum of my laptop became a white noise of anxiety rather than focus. I wanted to trust him, needed him to be family, but that knot in my stomach was growing. Something didn't feel right, and for the first time, I realized the stakes were higher than I'd let myself admit. One night, after a particularly long call with an investor, Ryan dropped another line. You know, if I were running this, it'd be done by now. He said it like a joke, but it wasn't. The words lingered, sharp and heavy in the quiet apartment. And for the first time, I started wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake by letting him in at all. It started with small things that made me question my own judgment. Emails I was certain I'd sent, suddenly marked as unread or with subtle changes I didn't authorize. Meeting notes I had meticulously prepared had extra comments in Ryan's handwriting, polite, professional, but clearly not mine. At first, I blamed exhaustion, thinking maybe I'd forgotten. But the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. A quiet alarm was ringing every time I saw one of those little discrepancies. One afternoon, I was going over investor messages when I noticed something that made my chest tighten. A pitch I thought we'd only discussed internally had already been sent by Ryan. My fingers froze on the keyboard, my heart hammering. I confronted him immediately, voice shaking. Did you send this? I don't remember approving it. He leaned casually against the doorframe, that infuriating smirk still in place. Yeah, I thought you were too busy. Don't worry, it's all good. I'm just helping you move faster. I wanted to scream, but I swallowed it. I wanted to believe him, needed to, almost, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Even the air in the apartment felt heavier, the hum of my laptop mocking me. Then came a tip-off from a friend who worked in the same industry. They'd heard someone talking about Ryan's new venture, describing the exact idea I'd spent months developing. My blood ran cold. I called Ryan immediately, heart racing, anger rising in my throat. What did you tell them? I demanded. He chuckled, almost casual. I might have mentioned some things. You're too slow, man. Someone had to step up. It felt like the floor dropped beneath me. Months of sleepless nights, sacrifices, and sheer grind were at risk of being stolen in a single, thoughtless conversation. The apartment that once smelled like ink and ambition now reeked of betrayal. I sank into my chair, staring at my notes, the weight of disbelief pressing down. I kept telling myself I had to stay calm, that I could fix this. But deep down, a part of me realized this wasn't just a minor slip-up, it was a crack, a fracture in trust that might never be repaired. And as I stared at Ryan's grinning face across the room, I couldn't shake the dread building inside me. Maybe he was already a step ahead. It hit me like a punch to the gut when I finally saw the full extent of what Ryan had done. I was scrolling through investor updates late one night when I realized something horrifying. The business pitch I'd been working on for months, every line of code, every market analysis, every painstaking detail had been sent out under his name. And worse, he'd already closed preliminary deals. My hand shook as I reread the emails, each one a dagger. Phrases like "our product will revolutionize the market" signed with his name. I felt frozen, betrayed, and utterly stupid for ever trusting him. I confronted him immediately, my voice cracking, barely above a whisper at first. Ryan, what the hell is this? You pitched my idea. You sold it. How could you? He leaned back in my worn-out couch. arms crossed, smirking like he was some genius who'd outsmarted me. "Look, you were too slow. You've been grinding, sure, but someone had to take action. Don't take it personally," he said casually, as if I should nod and thank him for his initiative. I felt my chest tighten, my vision blur. I couldn't believe my own brother, my family, had done this. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every ounce of energy I poured into building something meaningful had been handed over to him. My apartment, once a sanctuary of ambition, now felt suffocating. The ink-stained notebook seemed to mock me, the hum of my laptop like a relentless reminder of my betrayal. For a moment, I considered giving up entirely. Maybe I was too late. Maybe the damage was irreversible. The crushing weight of despair settled into my bones, and I realized just how alone I was in this fight. My brother, the person I trusted more than anyone, had crossed a line that couldn't be unseen. But beneath that raw, paralyzing anger, a tiny spark of resolve ignited. I refused to let him define the limits of my life, my work, or my potential. I would rebuild better and smarter, even if it meant starting from absolute scratch. As I sat there in the dim glow of my laptop, staring at the emails that had shattered my trust, I made a silent vow. I would get back everything he took, and I would make sure he'd regret ever underestimating me. The days after I discovered what Ryan had done were some of the darkest I've ever faced. I barely slept, my mind a constant whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and self-recrimination. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smirk, the casual way he justified stealing my work. I kept replaying conversations in my head, searching for signs I'd missed, clues I could have caught sooner. The betrayal wasn't just about business, it was personal, familial. Someone I trusted implicitly had weaponized that trust against me. I started withdrawing from everything else in my life. Friends called, concerned about my silence, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. Talking felt like admitting weakness, like giving Ryan even more power over my emotions. The apartment, once a space of ideas and ambition, now felt claustrophobic. My notebooks, scattered across the desk, seemed to whisper reminders of how close I'd been and how completely it had been ripped away. Even family weighed in, though not in the way I hoped. Some tried to console me, but others, subtly or not, hinted it was my fault for trusting him too much. Each comment dug the knife deeper. My anger swelled, but it was mixed with an aching sadness I hadn't anticipated. I felt small, powerless, and exhausted. I began questioning myself. Had I been naive, careless, or too trusting? Ryan, for his part, acted as though nothing had happened. He'd walk into my apartment with that same infuriating grin, making casual remarks about moving forward or getting things done. It was like salt on a wound. Each interaction reminded me that he had not only betrayed me, but also seemed completely unbothered by it. My respect, my trust, even my love for him as a brother, had been shattered in a single moment. And yet, somewhere deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in this pit. I couldn't let my life, my dreams, and all the hard work I'd poured into them be defined by his theft. I began sketching ideas again, tentative and messy at first, just small scribbles to remind myself I could still create. The spark was faint, but it was there. As I stared at the blank page in front of me, a quiet resolve began to form. I had been knocked down, yes, but I wasn't finished. I just had to figure out how to rise from the wreckage Ryan had left behind. I knew that if I was going to recover, I had to be smarter than before. No shortcuts, no trusting anyone blindly, not even family. I cleared my apartment of distractions, stacked my old notebooks in a corner, and started fresh, drafting every idea from scratch. This time, I worked quietly, obsessively, almost as if the secrecy itself was armor against betrayal. I pored over market research, scoured competitor strategies, and rethought every step I'd taken before. Every lesson from the past, every misstep, became fuel. I bought new notebooks, labeled folders meticulously, and set up stricter digital protections. Ryan had taught me one thing: trust was precious and fragile, but strategy and foresight could protect what mattered. I began to map out a new version of my product, something improved, more robust, and entirely my own. The thought of him knowing what I was building no longer flustered me. I wanted this to be untouchable. Each night, as my fingers flew over the keyboard, I could feel my confidence returning, mingled with a quiet, simmering determination. But rebuilding wasn't easy. There were moments when exhaustion crept in, or the memories of his betrayal clawed at me. The apartment felt smaller than ever during those nights, the hum of my laptop a relentless companion to my racing thoughts. I'd sometimes catch myself staring at the door, half expecting him to stroll in with that smirk and undo everything I'd just done. Those fears, however, only made me focus harder, reminding me why I was doing this. Even in these early stages, Ryan started picking up on whispers of my progress. Mutual contacts mentioned vague rumors, and I could almost feel his attention creeping toward my corner of the world. That only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just rebuilding a product. I was reclaiming my identity, proving that my hours, my effort, and my vision could not be stolen so easily. Late one night, exhausted but driven, I leaned back in my chair and looked at my new notes. Prototype sketches and plans. A sense of quiet triumph washed over me, even though the path ahead was long. I knew this was only the beginning, and that the real test, the ultimate showdown with Ryan, was still coming. But for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt in control again, and that flicker of power was intoxicating. Weeks passed, and slowly my rebuild started taking shape. Each day I chipped away at the product, refining features, testing new prototypes, and quietly reaching out to potential investors under the radar. This time, there was no room for error. Every line of code, every meeting, every email was carefully documented, protected, and double-checked. I was rebuilding not just a business, but my confidence, piece by piece. The first small wins were almost surreal. A freelance developer I trusted agreed to collaborate, impressed by the clarity and focus I now brought to the project. Early clients responded positively to beta tests, and even minor feedback felt like validation of all the nights I'd spent grinding alone. Each small victory was a balm to the raw wound Ryan had inflicted, a reminder that hard work, vision, and resilience couldn't be stolen so easily. Of course, Ryan's presence lingered like a shadow. I started hearing subtle murmurs from mutual contacts, mentions of his curiosity about what I was working on. It wasn't direct sabotage yet, just a quiet probing, but I could feel it. I made a mental note to be cautious, protecting the details that mattered most. Every time I typed an update or shared progress with someone I trusted, a small part of me flinched, remembering how easily Ryan had undermined me before, but the tension fueled me rather than broke me. I stayed longer at the desk, double-checked every prototype, and meticulously rehearsed presentations. Nights blurred into mornings, and exhaustion became a familiar companion again, but now it was different. Now, the exhaustion carried purpose, clarity, and a quiet sense of defiance. One evening, as I stared at the latest version of the prototype glowing under my desk lamp, I realized something. I was finally ahead. Not just technically, but emotionally. Ryan might have stolen the past, but the future was mine to define. I didn't know yet how he would react, or if he even understood the magnitude of what I was building, but I felt ready. And as I leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated, I whispered to myself, half smiling in the empty apartment, let him watch. Let him see what he can't take from me this time. The road wasn't smooth, and reality hit harder than I expected. Even with the prototype shaping up, setbacks kept piling in. Some investors questioned whether my new version could compete with the original idea Ryan had pitched, unaware that it had been stolen from me. Technical glitches popped up at the worst possible moments, and I spent long nights troubleshooting problems I hadn't anticipated. Fatigue settled in deep, my body ached, my mind screamed, and doubts began whispering that maybe I was too late, that maybe Ryan's head start was insurmountable. The isolation weighed heavily too. Friends and family, though well-meaning, didn't fully understand the magnitude of the betrayal. Some suggested I move on, shrug it off, or just accept that he'd taken the lead. Each suggestion felt like salt in an open wound. I felt crushed, caught between the frustration of starting over and the relentless drive to reclaim what was mine. Nights in my apartment became long marathons of work punctuated by moments of pure despair. I'd stare at the glowing screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, wondering if all the sacrifice would ever pay off. But in those darkest nights, the memory of Ryan's smug face fueled me. I couldn't let him win, not in life, not in pride, not in the story of what I'd built. Every problem I solved, every late-night tweak, felt like a small victory against the shadow he'd cast over my world. I began documenting everything meticulously: contracts, prototypes, email chains, backup plans so there was no way he could interfere again. And then, after weeks of grinding and near silence, a breakthrough came. A potential investor responded positively to my refined pitch, showing genuine excitement about the improvements I'd made. The small flicker of hope turned into a roaring fire of determination. I realized that the setbacks had shaped me, sharpened me, and prepared me for this exact moment. As I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but burning with resolve, I felt it. The tide was finally turning. Ryan had underestimated me, and for the first time in months, I felt a quiet thrill of anticipation. But even as hope surged, I knew the hardest battles, the confrontations, the exposure, the ultimate reckoning, were still ahead. The breakthrough with that first investor felt like the first real proof that I could rise from the wreckage Ryan had left behind. Calls started coming in, emails pinging with interest, and even beta testers were giving overwhelmingly positive feedback. My late nights, meticulous documentation, and relentless focus were paying off, and for the first time in months, I felt that familiar surge of excitement, the one I'd felt before Ryan had shattered everything. But this time, it was tempered with caution. I knew better now. Nothing could be left to chance. Ryan, of course, was aware of the whispers about my progress. I started hearing about his inquiries through mutual contacts, casual mentions that felt more like probes than compliments. He wanted to know how far I'd come, and the thought of him lurking at the edges of my rebuild made me sharper, more careful. Every prototype revision, every email, every meeting was done with laser focus, knowing he might try to undermine me at any turn. The threat of his interference made the small victories even sweeter. I was working in overdrive, but this was different from before. Before, it was frantic, unstructured chaos. Now it was strategic, deliberate. I knew the stakes, and I knew what betrayal felt like intimately. Each night, I refined my product, rehearsed pitches, and ran simulations, anticipating problems Ryan could never foresee. Exhaustion still stalked me, but I welcomed it. It was proof I was in control again. Then came the moment that changed everything. My new pitch was received with excitement far beyond what I'd imagined. Investors praised the innovation, the thoughtfulness, and the improvements over anything previously offered. Suddenly, the stolen idea felt like a distant shadow. I was finally creating something distinctly mine. Something that could not be replicated or stolen again. As I sat in my apartment, the hum of the laptop filling the quiet, I realized that the balance of power had shifted. Ryan might have stolen the past, but the present and future were mine. The question was no longer whether I could recover it, it was how far I could go, and how much he would regret underestimating me. I knew it was time to face Ryan directly, to confront the betrayal that had haunted me for months. I didn't want a casual conversation. I needed him to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. One evening, I called him over under the guise of discussing some family matters, but my mind was sharp, my purpose clear. As soon as he walked in, that infuriating grin on his face, I felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. He had no idea how ready I was. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ryan," I said, my voice steady but edged with controlled fury, "you sold my idea. You took months of my work, my time, my sacrifices, and used them as your own. Do you even realize what you've done?" He leaned back casually, pretending to be unbothered, smirking. "I was just helping you move faster," he said, as if that excused everything. His arrogance only fueled me further. I laid out my plan carefully, step by step. "I've rebuilt everything from scratch, legally, strategically, and better than before. Every prototype, every client contact, every investor pitch is mine now. There's nothing you can do to touch it." I could see his smirk faltering slightly, that casual composure starting to crack. For once, I had the upper hand, and I intended to make sure he knew it. The tension in the apartment was thick, charged, every word cutting sharper than a knife. He tried to interject, to justify, to charm his way out, but I wasn't swayed. I was calm, prepared, and unshakable. I realized then that this wasn't just about reclaiming a business, it was about asserting my worth, proving to myself that no betrayal, no matter how personal, could define me. As he left, awkward and subdued, I felt a surge of vindication. The battle wasn't over, but the scales had shifted unmistakably. I knew the final payoff was coming. I had taken control of my destiny, and Ryan had been forced to watch me rise from the ashes of his betrayal. The satisfaction was quiet but intense, and for the first time in months, I felt fully in control of my life and my future. The launch day of my rebuilt product was surreal. Months of grueling work, late nights, and relentless focus had culminated in this moment. And as the first clients and investors started coming on board, a wave of validation hit me like a shockwave. Everything I'd lost to Ryan now seemed like fuel that had powered me beyond what I could have imagined. I watched numbers climb, emails pile up, and feedback pour in, all confirming that this version, forged entirely by my hands, was stronger, smarter, and more desirable than anything he had sold. Ryan tried to intervene one last time. I heard through the grapevine that he was scrambling, trying to pitch minor variations, spread doubt about my progress, and warn potential clients away. But it was too late. I had documented every step, protected every innovation, and built relationships that he couldn't touch. Every attempt he made to interfere only highlighted how far ahead I had become. Sitting in my apartment, the glow of the laptop illuminating my tired but triumphant face, I felt a mix of vindication and relief. The betrayal had been devastating, but the rebuild had transformed me. I was no longer just the hard-working brother who trusted too much. I was someone who had survived, adapted, and emerged stronger. And then, as if the universe wanted to underline the justice of it all, news reached me that Ryan's venture, the one he'd stolen from me, was floundering. Investors were pulling out, clients were leaving, and the initial excitement he had enjoyed had evaporated. The smugness that once filled his every gesture was gone, replaced by frantic calls and desperate explanations he knew I wasn't picking up. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, triumph, and a touch of pity. The person who had betrayed me now faced the consequences of his own choices, while I had turned devastation into empowerment. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was a victory rooted in resilience, skill, and determination. As I leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated, I realized something profound. I had been broken. Yes, but I had rebuilt myself stronger than ever. And Ryan? He was left staring at the ruins of what he'd tried to claim, powerless to undo the reality I had created. Sitting in my apartment that night, the hum of the laptop a familiar companion, I finally let myself breathe. The storm of betrayal, exhaustion, and doubt that had consumed me for months was finally behind me. I had rebuilt everything from scratch, stronger, smarter, and entirely my own. Every late night, every sacrifice, every moment I had doubted myself had led to this proof that resilience and focus could overcome even the deepest betrayal. I reflected on how much I had learned, not just about business, but about people, trust, and boundaries. Ryan had taught me a harsh lesson. Trust is precious, and some people are willing to exploit it without a second thought. But I had transformed that lesson into strength, turning despair into determination and betrayal into fuel for my own growth. I was no longer the brother who had quietly endured. I was the one in control, the one who had turned loss into opportunity. The satisfaction wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, deep, and irrevocable. Investors were impressed, clients were thrilled, and my product was gaining traction in ways I hadn't even imagined. The legacy Ryan tried to steal was now mine in every sense that mattered, not because of revenge, but because I refused to let anyone define my limits. I had reclaimed my life, my work, and my confidence. And as for Ryan, he eventually stopped reaching out. The calls, the casual smirks, the attempts to undermine me, they all faded into silence. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching him confront the reality of his failure was satisfaction enough. I had outlasted him, not through confrontation, but through persistence, skill, and unwavering dedication. Leaning back, I looked around my apartment's scattered notebooks, glowing screens, and the faint smell of coffee, and smiled. The journey had been brutal, painful, and exhausting, but it had shaped me into someone I could be proud of. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I felt unstoppable.